Welcome to part 2 of our conversation with Frank. Let's jump back into it.
I've worked with leaders in big organizations where, let's say 3 years ago, the organization laid off about 20,000 people globally. And I worked with people that were told, you are going to leave in 10 months. If you train somebody, you will get some bonus, retention bonus. Or they were already the only person, or out of, 10 people, maybe one of the 3 people left on the team. And there was a big amount of grief and anger and disillusionment. And I know some leaders were asking, how do I motivate my team in the situation when I myself am feeling this way? I wonder, would that be one of the situations where somebody is going, or through currently even in the war regions, or I have clients impacted that they have colleagues in the regions that are currently in difficult situation? Would that be an opportunity to introduce restorative circles in these situations?
Yeah, the short answer, I've seen it work in different settings. The one thing I would add as a caveat, though, is the leader, the person who wants this. It can't be performative. It can't be reactive. It can't be any of those things. It really needs to be genuine, because I feel anybody in that space, let's say it gets created, we're all adults. We're going to notice if it feels performative, and that can have severe negative blowback. I think that's the one thing I would say. Yes, absolutely, restorative circles can work, but what is the intent behind the person or leader who's bringing it together? And if there's a sense or a sniff of performative, I think that's the part. If you really want to do this, you got to be 100% in. You can't do this for profits.
Frank, I'd love to get into the nitty gritty for the people listening. They're thinking about this. And if they were, talk us through what your process is in terms of preparing for a circle. When you're preparing for this, you're prepping. What does that look like? What are you thinking about? Both the logistics, but also internally, what's the facilitator preparing?
Yeah, when I saw this question, I think the immediate thing was to think about the physical space as well. Anytime I'm doing these, and of course there's the challenge if it's virtual, but this is, again, where having a guided facilitator makes so much sense, because camera's got to be mostly on. So you got to look at everybody, kind of see body language and kind of all of those things. So it's very important that your physical or even your virtual space, that you have an opportunity to kind of see what is. And so let me go back to the actual, if it's in person, making sure it's in a literal circle, making sure that the agreements are visible to everybody. That's how I always prepare for that, is just to make sure the room's comfortable, there's enough food, that the room temperature is in a good way, because all of that impacts, and I think about specifically with the food bank, that network that I've been working with, food, if you're hungry, and we know this with children, if they're hungry, that impacts their ability to take in knowledge, learn. That extends into adulthood too. So making sure that people are fed, all of those logistics and preparation goes into place. Now you also ask, okay, the internal part. So the internal part is really the questions. So we had, again, I'm not going to be able to recall them, but we had 7 base questions for those listening sessions a year ago, but they were vetted, so I had a project partner. So we looked at them together, and we wanted to make sure that one led into the next, but it also, that was open-ended in a way that was going to point to the things that we wanted to talk about. So again, challenges, but we also asked for solutions. One of the questions was, if you could speak to an elected official or somebody who could make a difference around this, what would you say? And so it was very purposeful moving through that. So question preparation is critical. And then that being said, Chris and Lucie, is also be prepared to be flexible. Like, my biggest pet peeve with facilitators is I can tell immediately when they go from one question to the next, and somebody, let's say they said something, let's say somebody in the audience said something that was just a nugget of gold, and you're like, I've seen facilitators go, oh, thank you, and then they move on to the next question versus exploring it. Like, if I hear a nugget of gold and I hear like gasps, like and like good ones, like, then I'll be like, oh, well, tell us more. Tell me more about that. And that just moves the conversation into this direction that we weren't prepared for. And those are those moments, again, in preparation, is, yes, have your questions, but be ready to I don't want to say pivot, be ready to ask the follow-up question, because you can come back to your base questions, but don't be so concerned about time is right here. I need to get to the next question. I don't have enough time. For me, I always feel like I'll make the time. I can always make the time. But if I miss this nugget of gold because I'm concerned about how much time I have, that is detrimental to the experience of having this organic conversation. So that's how I prepare. So yes, the physical space, prepare the questions, but also be prepared to be flexible on those follow-up questions.
I think you're right that many, especially newer facilitators, are so worried about time. They're like, we have to keep moving forward. How do you recommend they just get more comfortable with being flexible and not be so stringent on that schedule?
This part I think is part intuitive. It's probably like 90% intuitive for me. Like I even just had this, I met with a representative who attended the kickoff session last Friday. And she was like, oh my God, Frank, I kept looking at my watch, but you were always on time and blah, blah, blah. And that's a huge compliment because I don't know how, and I don't want to say it that way because I want this to be a learning session. Have your script mapped out by time and then don't follow it. And what I mean by that is be prepared to know where you can shave time. So if I let a conversation go an extra 5 minutes and I know the next section is 15 minutes, I'll shorten it to 10. Anytime there's an opportunity to have these deep conversations, let them go. Let them go a little bit longer. And then what I do is then I look at my script, I look at the times, I looked at the next few sections. I'm like, I can shave time here. Or let's say you have a 15-minute break scheduled, shave it to 10. So there's always opportunities to catch up. And I think there's a fear with facilitators that, oh no, I don't know how to get back to it. And so I guess for new facilitators, that's what I would recommend. Just have your script, be prepared to pivot, and then look where you can shave time off, especially in the not as essential sections, than having a deep conversation. If that's your key block where you want to get the most information, be okay with letting that expand a little bit.
How long do they usually take these sessions, the restorative circle, one session, let's say?
Well, the ones, they can vary. I think an hour is too short. So I also build in breaking bread. So when we did the in-person one, first half hour, we break bread. So this one was a 3 hour, but it was really 2.5 hours. And so that's what happened on Friday. It was a 3 hour session, half hour. We broke bread. That really gets people in a space of like, oh, okay. And then you move through these questions, which then generate really good conversations. So I would say between 2 and 3, outside of the breaking bread, but I like to include it, is between 2 and 3 hours, because it really, again, what you want to do is allow for these conversations to come out. And if you've got 5 questions and you've got 10 to 15 people and you want every person to share, that's what you got to build in. And so that's why an hour is, in my opinion, too short. If you've got 2 to 3 hours, you can build more. This particular group that I have for the food bank, there's 9 of them. So I can already build in, okay, 9 people. I can probably ask like 4 or 5 questions where everybody can participate and contribute. So I would say my safe space, it's funny I say safe space, I guess in this way I can say safe. Well, my good bet is that it's going to be between 2 and 3 hours.
That can be intense, especially if it's about something heavy, as you mentioned.
And so incorporating breaks, it doesn't all have to be serious. So you're right. There's an intentionality. Again, I'll think about the one that just happened on Friday. We had moments where I had them recall what do we call it? Name a dish that raised you. And so we all got to share stories about food that has presented itself throughout our lives, and people were laughing and having joy around it. So I think having those elements of joy is critical to having a hard conversation. So yes, you're right. It can be intense, but if you balance it with some good memories or activities that bring out joy, that helps.
So being intentional about not just asking the question that may bring up some difficult feelings, but also questions that bring up the happy memories and balancing it out.
Yes, and recognizing if it becomes heavy for somebody. I've had people step out for a while, which we want you to do that. If that's what you need, step out for a bit and then they come back. And we do a check-in, at the next break, we'll say, hi, how are you doing? The goal is not to reopen wounds. The goal is to move through this space where we care about them. And if they need to take a break, we see that. And again, to the earlier point about new facilitators, I don't think they always see that. So again, having somebody who's a guided facilitator, somebody who's had some, at least witnessed it or legs under their themselves, that they can recognize those little changes in body language are crucial to ensuring that protection.
That might take a lot of presence also from the facilitator. And that
Yes.
may take up a lot of energy. How do you feel after the sessions as a facilitator?
It varies, but yes, if it's like heavy, like my program, Ascending Leaders in Color, we'll have topics like on microaggressions or code switching or the bias of professionalism. And oftentimes those were heavy because a lot of the folks, the people of color in the space, maybe they hadn't thought about it in decades. So sometimes it can be very heavy. But again, that's why recentering joy usually always happens in those spaces. I want to make sure that they're not leaving fully raw. And you want to give them time to process. So often the facilitator, it can be really exhausting, even just the length of stuff. But I will say that's not always the case, because Friday, that group was so wonderful. I couldn't help but leaving just smiling and like, these people really like each other. And it's like, you get so excited about the next 5 sessions. You're like, I was like, they're going to be so great when they're telling their own stories and on their own terms with their own agency. So yeah, it varies, but yeah, some can be heavy. And then others, even if they're heavy, they can be really just heartwarming. You're just like, oh, these people are amazing. That's how I left on Friday, just thinking how amazing these people were, so committed, so passionate about food access. You're like, this is lovely.
So it can be really a recharging experience as well.
Totally.
In case it's draining, or for any leader that's new at facilitation and maybe they were nervous and after the end they are drained, what would you recommend? What are some of your techniques to recharge yourself?
I would do the recentering joy. That goes to the facilitator too. So even when I do these, and I did this on Friday, I said, tell me a fun activity you're going to do this weekend and help recenter your joy. I shared my own. And I'm a big basketball fan. So I was like, oh, I'm going to watch the U of A basketball team. That brings me joy. So to me, for facilitators, it's not just what's happening to them. Even though you want a guided facilitator to ensure that it is about them, you're still a part of it. So I'm not saying to interject your own stories, because sometimes I've had groups ask me, well, Frank, what about you? And that always surprises me. I'm like, oh, you want to know my thoughts? Okay. And so I share my thoughts. But what I guess my larger point is that facilitators can't, even as a fly in the wall, they can't help but take in those emotions and take in those feelings of what they've just heard. This is often called like compassion fatigue. And so that is a real thing, where when I worked at that nonprofit I worked at, our clients were students who were going through some of this food inaccess and whatnot. And they had their we called them career counselors. So our career counselors would come out exhausted because they'd been hearing, because they met with each of the students regularly, like, Frank, I am just mentally not there. And I'd say, go home. So those are real things to consider. And as a facilitator, know when you're feeling a certain way and either get rest, do something fun, whatever points you to moving into a space of recuperation, do it.
Does it include listening to podcasts as part of your?
Yes. Particularly this one.
Yeah. Frank, is it okay if I go back to something you mentioned? And I think it's a really important point that I think facilitators and leaders could just really take note of. Is you've mentioned this a few times, like asking really good pointed direct questions, even when you're trying to shift over to joy, or you're trying to not called icebreaker, but you're taking just a break, right? And I think there's something powerful about the way in restorative justice, how we ask questions, that I like always dislike the idea of team building as a activity. I always refuse those kind of engagements, because just asking somebody what's your favorite flavor ice cream is like nonsense. Like, it's fine, but like it won't build a connection. But the way you ask the question about food, what was a food that raised you, is different. It's different than just what is your favorite food. What's a food that raised you accesses memories and feelings,
Yes.
which is what we're trying to connect with people. And so how can leaders start reframing, their team icebreaker questions and the way that they ask each other questions to access those memories and emotions in a safe way,
Yeah. First of all, love that question because I feel like the last several presentations I've done, I've used some form of a restorative circle in the actual presentation to
Nice.
generate these responses. So I'm going to give you one really cool example. So one, your question is pointing to, well, how do you get leaders to have these, or to where it's more than just an icebreaker, connected to whatever, let's say it's the organization. So this, I did one not for the Food Bank Network, but our local, it's called the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona here in Tucson. So the question was around just, they brought me in, I think it was, I'm trying to remember what the exact reason they brought me in, but not important. Let me just tell you what the prompt was. The prompt was to share a food memory that brings them joy. And so that is the O. So that's the objective of ORID. I asked an objective question. Just share a memory of, a food memory that always brings you joy. Then having them walk through it. My next question, which was also an O question, objective question, I said, tie your five senses into what your memory was. And then people are like, oh, I remember the smell. It was loud. People were laughing. So now they're really getting deeper into that. So that really then helps shape moving people in a space of a memory, like a positive one. Then the R questions, the reflective ones, was what you just said a second ago. Well, how did that make you feel? And then people go, oh my gosh. And people were crying. Like it was just a joyful memory for many people, and saying, it reminds me of how important my family is. One was a chef at the food bank. So what brought him joy was, he goes, I'm preparing meals for people who've never experienced a certain type of meal, and to see the joy coming out of their face. So I think leaders just need to move into that space of like, okay, what is the purpose of this? What is the purpose of the meeting or the purpose of the organization? Tie that in. And it was really easy for me to do it with the food bank. Share a food memory. I did a session with the school district, and my prompt was, share a memory when you were a student of a favorite teacher, and that again, it's like, oh, Mr. Wong did XYZ, blah, blah, blah. Ms. Tesarova, I know I'm totally butchering that, did these things. And having people walk down that memory of the senses really does change. I feel like it changes the internal of the person being asked. It's like, oh, you really want to know this? And like, no story is less important. That was the beauty of it when I was walking through each of these folks. One was like the memory of going, she didn't, raised by a single mother, and her memories were when the the farmers markets would come to the schools, and she would grab fruits that she had never experienced before, nor her mother did, would take it home and then be eating it with her mom, and they're experiencing this food memory together of like whether they liked it or didn't like it. So it just helps folks be seen when it's more than just what's your favorite flavor of ice cream. It really does.
Frank, let's imagine somebody says, I don't like listening to part one of two-parters ever. I only like to listen to part two. And so they turned on this episode and they said, actually, I don't even want to listen to the first 25 minutes. I want to skip ahead. And they skip ahead to right here. Other than go back and listen to everything and watch part one, listen to part one. What are the 1 to 2 big takeaways from our conversation today you'd hope they walk away with?
I think it's really important, and I say this in a broad sense, and then I'll answer the second part, to ensure that you're setting the container to have the conversation, the hard conversation. Don't just jump into it thinking, oh, I'll just ask these questions. If you avoid setting the container to have it, it's likely not going to be a good conversation. So I think that's the most important thing. And so then the other piece I would say under that is, as you're creating this container, the agreements help so much. It puts everybody on the same page. These shared agreements, everybody can look at, point at, and it helps them tell their stories in a way that people are listening from their heart, and where you're speaking from your heart, and vice versa.
I love that. And let's say somebody's listening and they're like, we need Frank to help us with this because our team is all over the place, or our organization is all over the place. How could they get in contact with you or follow you or just even see you?
Absolutely. So obviously my website would be the first place to go. You can kind of see some elements. I talk a lot about my program, Ascending Leaders in Color, and a lot of those pieces are restorative circle practices. So I would point them there first, forthehood.com. That's the number 4, DA hood.com. My email address would be frank at frank@forthehood.com. And you'll find a lot of information on there, but I would love for people to reach out to me by email so that I can kind of share. They can also subscribe. There's a link as well. I don't know if I should provide you that link or a QR code, but I want to make sure. Yeah, it's just, or you can just go to the website and you can subscribe. That is a great way to kind of see all the things that are happening around restorative circle practices that I talk about, or if it's ascending leaders in color, or just the activities, they all seem to point back toward restorative circles. So yes, forthehood.com, frank@forthehood.com, and sign up for my email list.
Yeah, and we'll put all that in the show notes. I think it's worth following you. I love this topic. Lucie, what else what do you have going on for the people if they want to talk to you and follow you?
You can follow me on LinkedIn, but to be honest, don't expect fast reply. Still dealing with that one a little bit over lunch. But you can message me over my website, mindfittery.com. And if you are curious, what might be some things that hold you back internally, maybe you feel like you're a leader in an organization, leader of color, or any leader and you feel like the imposter. Sometimes the higher we grow, the more of the inner critic is messing with us. And that's one of the saboteurs. So if you want to know how to deal with those internal critical voices and be empowered leader, and so you can be your best self in any organization or in your life, then you can go to mindfittery.com/befree, BEFREE, bad speller, and take the assessment. What about you, Chris? How people can reach you besides our podcast and following our podcast and subscribing to it?
Yeah, I'm mostly on LinkedIn. That's the only one I have the energy to focus on if you want to follow me there. And I'll say this, one of my big goals of this year is to win the Mega Millions or the Powerball. So if anybody has the winning number, please email me directly. I'm happy to split the winnings. I will split the winnings, but that's just one of my big goals for the year, just to win hundreds of millions of dollars in the lottery.
I agree. Then it makes our work easier. I mean, that's literally what I want to win.
Yes, exactly. Listen, if this episode was helpful, if you found it helpful, please like it, share it, subscribe. Please share it with somebody else who you think might benefit from it. Help us grow our podcasts. But otherwise, we'll see you all next week. Frank, thank you so much. I could talk about this forever because I'm a big restorative justice advocate and proponent.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate both of you.
Thank you, Frank.